Digital Foundry is sponsored by Backface, the leader in crash and error reporting for game developers. Click on the link in the video description and sign up for your free trial today.
For my tastes, no console launch is truly complete without a platform game. And thankfully, with PlayStation 5, Sony and developer Sumo Digital have exactly that with Sackboy: A Big Adventure. Now, this is an interesting one and a game I really wanted to talk about personally, as I've had a lot of fun with it. It's an Unreal Engine powered platformer that ships on both PlayStation 5 and PlayStation 4. So it gives us a chance to see Sumo stretch its legs on Sony's new machine, while also allowing us to see what kind of cuts you might expect with last generation hardware during this cross-generation period. The key here is that unlike the original Little Big Planet titles, Sackboy is a full-on 3D platformer, more closely resembling something like Super Mario 3D World than any previous entry in the series. There's no creation mode here, and every stage is focused on beautiful 3D platforming action with up to 4 players. So let's jump in and check out what makes the visuals shine, compare and contrast with PlayStation 4, and discuss the game's frame rate. When you first begin this delightful little game, you're treated to an interactive title screen. It's a nice place to begin, in fact, and something we'll revisit on PS4 shortly, but once you push forward into the game itself, prepare for a gorgeous introduction sequence, which is the first visual element I'd like to discuss. At certain points throughout the story, you're treated to these real-time 60 frames per second cutscenes, and they're beautiful. As the camera zooms into the world of the Sack people in this introduction scene, for instance, the sheer amount of detail on display is simply breathtaking. But it's the carefully crafted lighting and materials work that really steals the show. On the lighting side, the mix of volumetrics, dynamic glowing lights, and ambient shading creates something that looks and feels almost tangible, yet fantastical. It's quite stunning. This is doubly true of the materials authored for this game. The physically based sack material itself combines with small transparent alpha bits designed to simulate rogue fibers across its surface. It's simply superb. Little Big Planet has always centered on these real-world materials, but Unreal Engine and impressive art design really allows it to shine. Unreal's exceptional bokeh depth of field also works in tandem with the dynamic camera to create something rather impressive. Basically, the team is combining many of Unreal Engine's robust features with strong art direction to create something that looks almost like a pre-rendered film at times. Okay, but what about the game itself? What you see during gameplay. Well, as always for the series, Sackboy combines these real-world objects and materials to create its worlds. We saw this in the introduction, but it makes even more sense once you actually play the game. You'll run across wooden planks with realistic grain patterns, swing around on spindles made of sponge, run through fields of carpet, climb on pieces of leather, and more. It's all mashed together to create this rather impressive, pseudo-realistic world. All of this is viewed from a fixed camera angle, again somewhat similar to Super Mario 3D World. The camera system works well and is pulled back enough to allow 4 players to exist within the environment at the same time, though I only got to test this in single player. Another highlight is screen space reflections, and yeah, I know, SSR, it's old news at this point, but I was impressed at the application in this game. SSR is applied to many glossy and shiny materials throughout the world, but it's more often limited to objects such as this rather than large surfaces. It's rather effective because the limitations of SSR are rarely evident as a result. You'll notice these reflections in many objects as you run around, and in fact the reflection of your character even plays off the collectibles scattered about each level, which, by the way, still have their own physics applied to them. Okay, so this is just kind of a quick summary to set the stage as to what you can expect. It's a great looking game on PS5 for sure, but to get into more details we need to move on to the comparison with PlayStation 4. This is our first real cross-generation comparison, and there are some interesting trade-offs between the different versions. But let's start with the more traditional metrics. Resolution. Through testing, I found that the average resolution settled around 75% of 4K. Unreal's temporal anti-aliasing combines with this to create a very clean and smooth looking game. Dynamic resolution appears to be in play as well, with slight increases both above and below this point. But what about PlayStation 4? Well, on the venerable PS4 Pro, the primary resolution seems to be 1080p with potential for DRS. This seems rather low, of course, but this is a 60 frames per second Unreal Engine 4 game with large environments, so it kinda makes sense based on prior examples of Unreal running on this machine. The base PS4, though, comes in even lower at just 720p. So this is an example of scaling neatly across 7 years of PlayStation. The resolution boost between each machine is significant and suggests that this was perhaps a PS5 targeted game first and foremost, but the flexibility of Unreal allows it to work well across all platforms. Of course, it's not just resolution, and if it were, I might be a tad disappointed, but it seems that Sumo Digital has taken the time to include many visual features that were absent from PlayStation 4 without ruining the visual design. So what is different, you ask? Well, let's start here, right at the title screen that I mentioned earlier. We get a small taste of the differences. Look below Sackboy. Notice his reflection here on PS5? This is SSR, of course, and if we flip over to PS4, it's missing, something we'll be seeing much more of shortly. Now, as we begin our descent into the village during this introductory sequence, let's pause here for a moment, and you should notice a dramatic difference in overall scene fidelity. Aside from the resolution variation, the shading in occluded areas is much more pronounced and realistic on PlayStation 5. Note how this shadowed region appears overly bright on PlayStation 4 in comparison to the new machine. Moving forward into the town center, let us pause again and note the differences. Firstly, the sun rays used on PS5 are absent on the last generation machine. Lighting in general is dramatically different. You can see a reddish hue on PS5 that's absent on PlayStation 4, as well as a difference in material response. In fact, the scene features many changes to materials that help it look more realistic and almost CGI-like on PlayStation 5. You might also spot an example of screen space reflections in the central region of the area on Sony's newest machine. All of this leads to a more robust cutscene presentation. The thing is, these scenes still look great on PlayStation 4 even before you compare it, but there is a tangible boost in overall quality on PS5 that I can really appreciate. In that sense, I'm happy to see the developer taking advantage of the new hardware while still offering last generation users an attractive experience. But let's move on from cutscenes and jump into the game itself. Do these improvements persist? Well, the answer is yes, but perhaps not quite to the same extreme. Let me demonstrate. So the main differences seem to lie in overall object detail and additional effects and materials passes. Case in point, in this first level, you'll notice these lovely fields of yarn on PlayStation 5. They look great, right? Well, switching to PS4, the object is simply eliminated entirely. If you hadn't seen it on PS5, you probably wouldn't even notice, which is why I think it's a great choice for visual enhancement. It looks a lot better on PS5 when you have the option, but removing it doesn't ruin the overall visual fidelity. It still looks good. You'll see this kind of change throughout. Lots of additional minor details are simply snipped out of existence on PS4. This makes for a more detailed game on Sony's new machine all around. Okay, next up. Screen space reflections. We've talked about this several times already, but it's a detail present throughout every single stage on PlayStation 5, and of course it's completely absent on PS4. This can have a dramatic impact on the appearance of certain materials throughout the game, specifically things like metals. A nice example is this reflective metal spindle used in this section. It's completely plain looking on PS4. Now, moving on to the next stage, the opening area shows plenty of changes once more. Firstly, these particles which collect on the ground on PlayStation 5, the way they fall and collide with the player. It's a nice touch, and it's unique to the PS5 version. Same goes for this volumetric lighting to the left of the area. And in this pit, just a bit further. Other effects are also dependent upon rendering resolution. This is why depth of field varies slightly between each platform. The more you play, the more you'll discover these types of differences. Again, it's nothing major in a sense that the game still looks really nice on PS4 Pro, but all of these extra flourishes really benefit the overall presentation, leading to just a sharper, cleaner, more vibrant game on PlayStation 5. But you might be wondering, where does the base PlayStation 4 fit into this? Well, predictably, it's pretty much on par with the PS4 Pro version, just running at a lower rendering resolution. But visual fidelity is not the only difference. There's also loading times. Taking advantage of the PS5's SSD, Sackboy manages to move between areas so fast that it closely resembles something like Super Mario 64 on Nintendo 64. You basically enter a level, get a quick transitional screen, then you're dropped into the next area. Oh, and everything's connected by this lovely overworld. Perhaps taking a page from classic Nintendo games, you'll unlock various paths as you move through the world, including optional levels and shops. Heck, you can even jump into later worlds by finding shortcuts similar to Super Mario World. Thanks to the fast loading on PS5, this all feels very seamless, much like a cartridge game. Now on PlayStation 4, loading is perfectly fine, but also much more in line with what you would expect from an Unreal Engine 4 game running on this hardware. You're certainly not going to mistake this for a cartridge game, that's for sure. So yeah, it's a predictable boost in favor of PS5, but a welcome one all the same. So thus far, I think it's clear that Sackboy takes advantage of PS5 in a rather smart way. All the visual changes are not a game changer, so to speak, but they offer a lot of visual niceties that greatly enhance the overall presentation. Plus the faster loading just makes it more pleasant to play through. But how does it actually run? Well, there are two performance scenarios to consider: cutscenes and gameplay. On all three platforms, gameplay generally delivers a very stable 60 frames per second, the minimum frame rate for a smooth platform game, I think. I say generally only as a precaution, as I have spent less time playing the game on PlayStation 4. I can, however, say that the PS5 version is virtually flawless. It's as smooth as you could ever want, just an example of perfect performance. Honestly, at the launch of these new consoles, I'm really impressed with just how many games run at 60 frames per second, or heck, even more. It's a much, much higher percentage than what we saw with PS4, PS3, Xbox 360, and Xbox One. Now, both PS4 consoles also managed to deliver a smooth frame rate, which is key. But when you get to the cutscenes, they crank up the details a little. So let's start with the base PS4 actually, because I immediately noticed dips on this platform during this introduction cutscene. Nothing major, mind you, but it is there, and it does kind of give us an idea of just how demanding this sequence truly is.
Oh, I do love a warm welcome. That look of pure terror. Oh, it gives me a tingly feeling.
Now, this improves somewhat on PS4 Pro, but again, it's not entirely flawless.
Of course you are. Well, you're just...
Over on PlayStation 5 though, even with an increased resolution and level of detail, the introduction runs basically perfectly. All of this is to say that the performance scales from PS4 to Pro to PS5, with each platform offering a slight boost over the other, with PS5 basically offering a perfect experience. Well, mostly. There is this one section where we get a few dips on PS5, but it's extremely uncommon and the only one I noticed of its kind. Of course, as I noted earlier, I do not have multiple controllers on PS5, so I couldn't really test the multiplayer function, but based on what we've seen from cutscene performance, I wouldn't expect any issues there. So yeah, the frame rate, it's good. Great even. In fact, despite the minor dips we noted in cutscenes earlier, I'd say the team did an excellent job all around across all three consoles. No matter where you choose to play, the game is fast, responsive, and smooth. I think it's fair to say that Sackboy is a perfect little game for launch then, with a beautiful presentation and tight gameplay, But there's one other point I'd like to briefly touch on, as I feel it's worth highlighting in this case, and that is the music. Yes, music is so important to the Little Big Planet experience. The original game leaned heavily on the Go team, and you will find them here in Sackboy as well. But there's plenty of new original music as well, and that sounds great too. Then on top of that, there are even other licensed tracks that are combined with specific levels focused on timing. Remember how Rayman Legends had those music stages? Yeah, it's similar to that, only in full 3D, with elements of the level being timed specifically to beats in the song. Take a listen. I'm a sucker for this kind of thing. It's really cool. But yeah, Sackboy, it's pretty great and well worth checking out, even if you haven't upgraded to PS5. That version is the best version of the game, absolutely, if you did pick up the PS5 console, but still, it's pretty solid on PlayStation 4. Now, before this generation started, I had expressed some concern over cross-generation releases, and I still stand by that. With certain types of games, I want them to focus specifically on next-generation hardware to achieve new and interesting things. The thing is, concepts such as Sackboy can easily exist across multiple platforms in a way that doesn't negatively impact the overall experience, and the visual boost you get from running the next-gen version is certainly worthwhile on its own. This is a great example of how to do cross-gen support right, is basically what I'm saying here. So, well done, Sumo Digital. But that's gonna do it for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed this little tour through this game, as I've had a ton of fun playing it over the last couple weeks. And if you did enjoy the video, as always, be sure to give us a like, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and find us on Twitter. You know, all the usual stuff. But for now, thanks for watching.
Don't lose players to game errors and crashes. Instability will happen throughout the game development cycle during playtesting, beta cycles, or after you've released. Backtrace was developed to automate the capture and analysis of crashes, hangs, and non-fatal errors across PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo, PC, Mac, Stadia, and more. Our unique data platform allows you to index anything, integrate with Jira, Slack, Discord, and run analytic workloads to better prioritize and understand your game's stability. Many of the industry's AAA studios depend on Backtrace. You should too. Click on the link in the video description and sign up for your free trial today.